Alright, this is Dr. Boff. Welcome back to some Kerbal Space Program. Alright, I think it's time. I think we're ready to launch our Duna return mission. So I've got the Gnome with some landing equipment atop this massive lifting rocket. The lifter itself is going to be a mammoth engine surrounded by 4 of these skipper 2-meter boosters, liquid fuel, and some extra little solid fuel boosters to give me that bit of extra thrust off the launch pad. So that mammoth has a lot of fuel tanks attached to it. I'm pretty confident it will get us into orbit and maybe into the transfer. So we wouldn't have to turn on the Poodle engine that lives attached to the Gnome until well into the transfer mode. I'm also thinking that we might need some extra fuel for the transfer over, so just for fun I attached a few extra fuel tanks up to the Gnome just for making the trip over. Since I'm using the Mammoth for a few things, I'm going to give myself a little bit of a restriction. So in real life, with these heavy lifting engines, they are gravity fed rather than pump fed. So once they're turned off, if they're not on the ground or they're not under some sort of acceleration, they cannot be switched back on. With that in mind, since I'm going to use this for the transfer stage, I'm going to try and do a single burn into takeoff, into orbit, and then around to the transfer into Duna. That might be tricky. If I have to turn off the engine, I'm going to consider it dead, and I'm going to lose that launch stage completely. But let's see what happens. Alright, let's try launching this monstrosity. If we're going to boost straight up and straight into a Duna transfer, we need to be launching at night. So when we turn east, we need that to turn our velocity vector in the same direction as the velocity vector of the Earth around the Sun. So if we're going to do that by turning east, then we have to do it roughly at midnight. So I'm going to fast forward over to midnight, and then we'll give the launch a go. We got solid fuel boosters first, liquid fuel boosters after that. They haven't been asparagus, so all 4 of those liquid fuel boosters are going to come off at the same time, if everything goes well. Alright, my physics engine is not super happy with the size of this rocket, but I think we're actually ready to go, so let's give it a try. Throttle as high as it goes, and we are hopefully off. Oh yeah, super convincing, hence the solid fuel boosters. Solid fuel booster is doing a pretty good job of sticking with us, getting us pretty high. Also, it kind of looks like maybe I did asparagus the fuel, the liquid fuel boosters on the sides and then forget that I did that. They seem to be burning through fuel at dissimilar rates. So hopefully I also staged them correctly. Incidentally, terrified to start my gravity turn with the massive rocket. I'm going to lose at least one more set of liquid fuels, which means this is probably going to happen very late. That could have gone better. Much better. None of the things that exploded were important. I left my gravity turn till way late though, so I'm gonna have to overcompensate a bit here. I'm sure it's fine. Alright, so I'm going to try and boost all the way up into the transfer orbit with this guy. I'm going to pretend it's like a modern lifting engine, which is gravity fed, so if I stop accelerating, I stop getting fuel flow, and I cannot switch the engine back on. Alright, and calling it quits on that engine. That is everything I'm getting out of that lifter stage. I've turned it off, and I'm now going to assume that it is literally impossible to turn back on, so I'll ditch it in a second. But I did get pretty close to my final transfer orbit before I chickened out. So let me jettison some things and then tweak this transfer a little bit. Alright, and the gnome is revealed. So it is buried away behind a few extra things. So we've got some landing and mining setups up here, some full-size mining rigs with some ore refineries and processors, and we've got 4 extra fuel tanks for the transfer over, all of which are suited to act as little communications-y doos when I drop them off on the way. Being as my launch stage got me so far into transfer, these are probably overkill. But I'm just going to kind of launch them and pretend I meant to bring communication satellites up this whole time. Alright, over at the ascending node, let me tweak my orbital plane so I come down towards the equator of Duna and go for an encounter. Alright, no encounter yet, but I'm not going to need as much of this external fuel tank as I thought, so I'm actually going to take this opportunity to launch off some of them as communication satellites. You can see I put little putt-putt engines on the back of them, so I should be able to give them a little bit of a boost, put them in some deep space orbits, and they can be some nice communications relay devices because I have some blind spots in my network. And the easiest way to do that is just to throw random garbage into random orbits, thus creating enough of a passable network rather than, say, plan out where they all might go. Smooth. Just kidding, this is not one of the fuel tanks I put a communications thing on. So I guess that's a waste. Alright, so it's time to do the landing for our Duna return mission. So I've got to, well, I don't have to, but I'm going to try and land where we dropped our setup base with the little rover and such. So I've got to make sure my orbit is just right, going right over that drop point, and then I'm going to actually have to land the thing on top of the rover. I have a plan for that, and it is super inefficient, but we'll see how it works. Okay, so the way I'm going to deorbit is I'm going to switch over to surface velocity. I'm going to get to the point where I'm immediately above this object, and then I'm going to just come to a complete orbital stop and fall down to Earth, firing little correction burns. Ridiculously inefficient, but I said in the previous part that I really want to burn off all of the fuel on this lander before landing, and we have quite a bit left. So let's try this. Also, I'm going to save first. So I'm going to fast forward in time until I've set the lander as a target. And I'm going to fast forward in time until the target reticule is as close as I can get to radial. Once the target vector is, anti-radial, then the target is directly below me. And once I've got that, I'm just going to blast the engines and come to a complete stop. All right, I think that's as close, or that's pretty close, so let's deorbit immediately. Drop the gear before I forget to do that. Okay, so the rest of this landing I need to do manually. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep retrograde pointed at the target. And the way I'm going to do that is with some manual flying. I'm going to steer such that I am pushing the retrograde vector towards the target. And the way you do that is you can imagine the retrograde vector runs away from you. So if you fire in a particular direction, you're going to chase retrograde away from that direction. So let's try that. So you can see as I fired, I chased the retrograde vector away from the target. I'm going to have to do that a little bit more as we go. Should also note that this is probably the least efficient way to do it. But even if you set out to do it more efficiently, you're still trying to match this goal of getting the retrograde vector to stay over the target. All right, getting a lot closer to the surface. Let's see how this goes. Well, shit. Um, okay. So I broke my rule about making sure I had little fuel left. And that's a no-go. Engine blows up. All right, let's try this again. All right, attempt 3. Let's see if we can slow down when the target icon gets close to the center of the nav ball. Basically just gonna fall out of the sky.
Hopefully, reasonably close to it, because that's been a few attempts by now. Right, also parachutes. Okay, super gentle on the landing this time. Like sub 5 meters per second. That's why we're doing this. All right, finally, we are down without explosions. That's pretty excellent. How far away are we from our rover target? Let's find out. Oh, holy shit. That's not too bad. That's it right over there. How about that? I'm just happy to be like in the same county. Can't figure out how to read distance to target, but I am pretty freaking happy with that. All right, let's set up our ground stuff. Get some drills going. Get some refining going. Top off that fuel. Maybe make a quick trip over to the science lab to do some science. Okay, this is slightly concerning. I don't know what's going on with the drills, but let's try one more time. So apparently we get to do the terrifying drill dance. Alright, so the mining operation is gonna take a long time. So I guess let's call that a part here, and next week we will get off the planet. Alright, thanks for watching. I'll see you next week.